The first stop sign, those of you who have spent any time in Mexico or Central America will recognize immediately alto is the word for stop. You'll see that on the stop sign. But look at that other one, pare. What's that all about? Okay, that's South America. So my point with this is kind of lighthearted, and that is, even when we all speak the same language, we don't speak the same language, which really kind of makes the whole idea of translation, transcreation, copywriting in Spanish a little bit of a challenge. You really have to know your audience. Quick vocabulary lesson for you, translation versus transcreation. Translation, I think most everybody in the room is familiar with that term. It's an accurate linguistic text transfer. It's saying hello in English and hola en español. That's pretty easy. You get a dictionary out, you find the most appropriate word. That's fine, except when you're writing marketing messages or you're trying to communicate with a community, because then you really have to think more about the idea that you're trying to communicate and not just the words that you're using to communicate. So if you think instead in terms of a translation is all about words, but a transcreation is about ideas. So it's about taking the idea of recycling and not just finding the best words to replace each English word, but instead recreating it in a way that really communicates the message, the idea behind what you're doing in English in a culturally and linguistically relevant way. So now you have a new vocabulary word to wow your associates with. So some statistics to share with you today, and the one I really want to draw your attention to is the very first one. First language learned to speak. These are U.S. Hispanics, and we know that roughly 85% of those individuals, their first language, Spanish, 15% English. Why is that important? That's important because your first language that you learn to speak is the one that will always have the deepest cultural connection, the deepest emotional and psychological connection. So even if I am perfectly bilingual, but if my first language was Spanish, even though I can pick up your messaging in English without any trouble, talking to me in Spanish will always have more of an impact, more of an emotional connection. That's important to keep in mind as you start thinking about ways to touch your Latino neighbors. Among bilingual Hispanics in this country, English ads are 38% less effective than Spanish ads in terms of recall. English ads are 70% less effective than English ads are 70% less effective than Spanish ads in terms of persuasion, and 27% less effective than Spanish ads in terms of communication. So what does that mean? Again, we're back to, although a lot of Hispanics here in the Portland area speak some English, a little bit of English, enough English, are you connecting with them? Are you speaking in a way that really gets them excited about recycling and gets them excited about public transportation and about bicycling? Now, here's an example we just talked about, this translation, transcreation. The one thing I want you to promise me to do when you leave today is do not try and translate online. Bad things will happen. So I tried to give you an example of this today. So what I started with was, thank you for your time and attention during today's presentation. I'm hopeful that you find the information to be useful. Okay, now those of you who speak Spanish, you can see that it's an okay translation. It's not great, but you know, you can sort of get your way through it and figure out what it is I'm trying to say. But look what happens when we take that and back into English. So here's what you may be hearing in Spanish when you go online for a translation. Thanks by its time and the attention during the presentation of today. Myself am an optimist that finds that the information to be useful. So can you see how translating online can be a really bad thing? At the end of the day, you understood every one of those English words I just repeated to you, but they were disjointed, the sentence structure was off, and you're like, yeah, I sort of get it, but ooh, who did this? Who wrote this? And that's what we're trying to help you avoid. So if you don't do anything else, stay away from the computer when you're trying to translate something.